Greetings in Jesus' name. It's good to be here with you this morning. As I look out over the crowd, many of you I don't know. Many of your faces I don't recognize. Some faces I do recognize. Some faces I even recognize and have names for. And then there's a few of you that I've known for years. I think probably some of my earliest memories of any of you would be the Yancey girls, Diane, Marilyn, and Gwen. When I was young, my family lived in the States for 3 years. We lived in Kentucky for 3 years. And I remember Gwen and Diane and Marilyn coming down to visit us with my aunt Mary Zare, who they're good friends with. And I think that was my first introduction to them. And I got to know that they go to church at Grace down by New Hamburg, Tavistock way. And little did I ever think I would be sharing a Sunday morning message at Grace. But God leads us in ways we would never imagine, and He uses us in ways we would never imagine. So we're happy to be able to be here and worship with you this morning. A little bit about us. My name's Randy Albright. My wife Teresa is here with me this morning. We live up, we're a Brussels address, but we're out in the country by the little town of Belgrave. You may or may not have ever been through there, just south of Wingham. We go to Zion. Last fall, November, I was ordained minister at Zion. So those are just a few things about us. I'm a horseshoer. I'm a farrier for my work. My wife works part-time at a bakery and is getting ready to teach kindergarten at Donegal School this coming term. So those are a few things about us, a few things that identify us. And that's a little bit the idea I want to explore for the message this morning. Not us personally, but the idea of identity. I've entitled the message, Who Are You? It's a question for each and every one of us. Who are we really? Several years ago, I heard a radio program on which this question was being discussed. And I remember very little about the program or what was said other than they pictured the scenario of meeting a new person, making introductions, getting to know a new person. And they observed how that, when asked who we are, often our first go-to is to give our vocation, what we do for a living. That's often what we identify ourselves with. And that's kind of all I remember from that program, but that kind of stuck with me. It made me think about what makes us who we are, what identifies us, and why that's important. We all have many things that identify us. Some of these are things that we choose, and some of them are things we don't choose. We don't choose where we are born, who our parents are, where we're raised. We don't choose our bodies, how tall we are. We don't choose our gender, regardless of what you would be told. And then some other things that identify us are to some degree our choice, what we do for work, our careers, our friends, our hobbies. And everybody wants to identify with something. Everybody needs, it's a basic human need, this need to identify with something. It gives us a sense of belonging, a sense of self-awareness, a connection to other people or to other ideas and things. And as humans, we all need and want that, even if we're not very aware of it all the time. Identity is something that's pertinent to everybody, no matter what age we are, what stage of life we're in. It's sometimes maybe thought of as a younger person's struggle, but it is something that anybody can struggle with as we go through life. And the things that are more or less important to us, that we identify with, may change, and they'll vary from person to person. We're all created wonderfully different. I think throughout history, though, it has been a thing that young people have tended to struggle with, this identity, where they belong, where they fit in, who they are. As you get older, as a child gets older and becomes less dependent on their parents, they tend to want to look for things that identify them uniquely, and that's a good thing. It's sometimes, though, hard to find the right things to identify with, and it may seem a hard thing, it may seem an exhausting thing to find the right things to identify with. And you may long to just be able to hitch your identity to something else, to attach to something. And again, everyone is made differently. Some are more independent, some are more dependent. For this reason, I think it's very important that young people have good role models. There's a lot of reasons why I think young people in the world we live in today struggle with identity. And I think that is a big one, though. There's a lack of good role models, a lack of strong homes, and these things can cause a lot of uncertainty, upheaval in young people's lives. But again, it's not just a young person's battle. Our identity is something we may wrestle with at any stage of life. There is, I think, a reciprocal link between trauma and identity. If we identify with something and it changes or is taken away, that can be a source of trauma to us. And when we experience trauma, that may cause us to shift our identity. It may force us to reassess who we are. Maybe you identify with your career and your job quite strongly, and you lose that. Or maybe you're a healthy person who doesn't really have any physical obstacles, and you get sick or injured, and you're forced to change your view of yourself. These things can be traumatic and hard to deal with. Losing a family member or a spouse can be a trauma that can make a person question their identity. And all of these things that make up who we are aren't bad things necessarily. The desire for identity isn't bad. It's part of being human. But the more stable or solid the things we identify with, the less trauma we'll experience, and the better equipped we will be to deal with the trauma that is unavoidable. So let's look at a story in the Bible where we can learn a bit about identity. We'll turn to an Old Testament story in the book of Judges. Judges chapter 11 is kind of where we'll get the most of this story from. I first came to this passage while studying for this message and while collecting ideas and material on identity. I first came here for the little tidbit in chapter 12 of Judges where the Ephraimites were identified as Ephraimites by their dialect or their inability to pronounce the SH in the word shibboleth. And I was thinking on identity and how these guys were identified by that. So I came to this story or this passage, and then I got reading the whole story surrounding this, and I realized the whole story of Jephthah here is full of examples of identity struggles and identity problems and ways that identity helped or hindered. So the setting for this story in Judges 11 can be found a little bit in chapter 10, and I'm not going to read that, but just summarize it a little bit. The Lord had punished Israel for idolatry here, and they'd followed other gods, forsaken him, and he allowed the Philistines and Ammonites to oppress them and to have them in bondage. And they cried to God to deliver them, as they did so many times. He initially said he would no longer deliver them because they'd forsaken him and chosen other gods. He told them, why don't you call on the gods you've chosen? But they repented. They put away the strange gods that they were worshiping, and they served the Lord. It says in verse 16, it says, his soul was grieved for the misery of Israel. And then in verse 17 and 18, we have the the story laid out where the children of Ammon were encamped together here, preparing to attack. And in verse 18, the people and princes of Gilead said one to another, "What man is he that will begin to fight against the children of Ammon? He shall be head over all the inhabitants of Gilead." So they needed a man to lead them into battle here. And in chapter 11, we have the story of Jephthah. And I love a good story. I've always loved reading and stories. And these old Bible stories, they really are the best stories. They have all the traits of well-written stories. They grab your attention. Sometimes you need to read between the lines a little bit. Sometimes more is said by what is not written. And the best part is these are true stories. These really happened. So chapter 11, the story of Jephthah, it's a story that starts out right away with some strife over identity. Jephthah suffers because of the sins of his father. He has to flee from his brothers, not for anything he's done or choices he's made, but for a circumstance beyond his control, for who he is, for who his mother was. So he has to flee and start life as an outcast from society. The first 3 verses give the origin story of Jephthah pretty concisely and efficiently. It says, "Now Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor, and he was the son of an harlot. Gilead begat Jephthah. And Gilead's wife bare him sons, and his wife's sons grew up, and they thrust out Jephthah, and said unto him, Thou shalt not inherit in our father's house, for thou art the son of a strange woman. Then Jephthah fled from his brethren, and dwelt in the land of Tob, and there were gathered vain men to Jephthah, and went out with him." So it appears as though Jephthah's father's name was Gilead, as well as he was identified as a Gileadite. He lived in the region of Gilead, which was a region on the east side of the Jordan River that was mostly inhabited by the half-tribe of Manasseh that shared their inheritance on the east side of the river with the tribes of Reuben and Gad. We aren't given timelines here. It doesn't tell us how long Jephthah had to live in this land of Tob as an outcast. It's interesting how it notes there were gathered vain men to Jephthah and went out with him. He seemed to have collected a group of acquaintances or comrades. And speaking of stories, it's interesting. This just made me think, how many of you probably read cheap fiction stories where the good guy has to flee town because he's unjustly driven out, and he goes and has to live somewhere else and meets up with other unfortunates, and it just makes me think that, all the stories people write seem to be based or to pattern after these Bible stories. I've thought that before about different Bible stories. But it doesn't tell us how long Jephthah lived there. It doesn't seem he wasted time feeling sorry for himself or plotting revenge. You don't become a mighty man of valor, as it describes him in verse 1, by just hosting pity parties for yourself. But in verses 4 to 11, again, I don't know the timeline on this, but the story moves on, and it kind of catches up with verse 18 in chapter 10 here. I'm just going to read verse 4 to 11. "And it came to pass in process of time that the children of Ammon made war against Israel. And it was so that when the children of Ammon made war against Israel, the elders of Gilead went to fetch Jephthah out of the land of Tob. And they said unto Jephthah, Come and be our captain, that we may fight with the children of Ammon. And Jephthah said unto the elders of Gilead, Did not ye hate me, and expel me out of my father's house? And why are ye come unto me now, when ye are in distress? And the elders of Gilead said unto Jephthah, Therefore we turn again to thee now, that thou mayest go with us, and fight against the children of Ammon, and be our head over all the inhabitants of Gilead. And Jephthah said to the elders of Gilead, If ye bring me home again to fight against the children of Ammon, and the Lord deliver them before me, shall I be your head? And the elders of Gilead said unto Jephthah, The Lord be witness between us, if we do not so according to thy words. Then Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him head and captain over them, and Jephthah uttered all his words before the Lord in Mizpah." So it's interesting how an outcast who had been ostracized from society for who he was, had gained such a reputation that the elders of the land here, when they needed a strong man to lead them in battle, he was the best man they could think of for the job. And it doesn't seem as though Jephthah held a grudge. For he brings up the way he was treated, but he doesn't demand an apology or need closure or have his feelings smoothed over. He just asks a few clarifying questions and gets to the work at hand. And through the rest of chapter 11, I'm not going to read it, but the rest of chapter 11 details his attempt at diplomacy with the children of Ammon, which failed, and then how the Lord delivered the Ammonites into his hand in battle. It also gives the somber story of his rash vow concerning offering his daughter to the Lord. And we're not going to get into that story this morning. It's a famous story that's often covered regarding Jephthah. But we're going to jump back in at chapter 12 then. At this point, the Ammonites have been defeated. The Lord's delivered the heathen enemy from outside into the hands of the Israelites. And then we have men of Ephraim coming to Jephthah. These are fellow countrymen of Jephthah. They're from the tribe of Ephraim. They're fellow Israelites. I think you could call them brethren of Jephthah. And they have a complaint. In verse 1 of chapter 12, it says, "And the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and went northward and said unto Jephthah, Wherefore passest thou over to fight against the children of Ammon, and didst not call us to go with thee?" So their complaint is that they weren't asked to go help in this battle. Now, I found it very interesting that earlier in the book of Judges, we have another account of the men of Ephraim coming to another of the judges of Israel with this exact same complaint. If you turn back a few pages to chapter 8, in chapter 8, we have chapter 7, the previous chapters to 8, we have the account of Gideon. Well-known story, again, of Gideon fighting the Midianites and overcoming the Midianites. Chapter 8, verse 1 says, "And the men of Ephraim said unto him, Why hast thou served us thus, that thou called us not, when thou went to fight with the Midianites?" I found that interesting. Same people coming to a judge with the exact same complaint. In chapter 8 with Gideon here, it says they did chide with him sharply. They spoke with him, arraigned him for their insult or whatever they perceived it as. In chapter 12 with Jephthah, they took it up a level or 2 or 3. They told him, "We will burn thy house upon thee with fire." Now the responses of Gideon and Jephthah make an interesting study, and we're not going to get into that a lot. It seems Gideon handled the situation a little more tactfully, and maybe you can also see the difference in personalities of these two judges. But regardless, this pattern of the Ephraimites picking a quarrel after a battle's been won made me wonder a little bit what was going on, why they felt this way. What was up with these guys? They should have been happy for their brethren's victory. They should have been glad that their nation of Israel was saved from an attack. So I looked a bit into the history of the two tribes that are represented here, Ephraim and Manasseh, and I think this maybe was a bit of an identity problem. If we turn back to Genesis 48 gives us the account of Joseph in Egypt taking his 2 sons, which were Ephraim and Manasseh, from which the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh came. He took them to see his father Jacob, as Jacob was sick in his old age. And I'm not going to read the whole chapter. The setting is Joseph bringing his sons to Jacob, and Jacob blessing them. We're going to break in, though, at verse 8, and I think I'll just read the account right through to verse 20. So Genesis 48, verse 8. And Israel, who was Jacob, Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, Who are these? And Joseph said unto his father, These are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place. And he said, Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them. Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. Now those details mattered to these people in that time. Israel putting his right hand on the younger son's head was quite out of the ordinary. The older son generally got the greater blessing, was the firstborn, was thought to be going to become more successful usually, and more emphasis was put on that. So this was out of the ordinary. Verse 15, and he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. And he blessed them in that day, saying, In these shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. So he set the younger son before the elder. So this made me think this story would have been passed down by oral tradition in the many years between this setting in Egypt and the time in the Judges in Canaan. And it seems that the people of Ephraim here, the descendants of the younger son who had been promised to be the more successful of the two, it seems as though these descendants were keen to make sure that they lived out this blessing, that they were more successful than their brethren in the tribe of Manasseh. And interestingly enough, both Gideon and Jephthah were from the tribe of Manasseh. So it seems the Ephraimites' identification was placed very strongly with their tribe, with the tribe of Ephraim. It seemed to be stronger than their identification with God's people. They were more worried about being successful, being the ones that gained the victory, being the leaders, than they were about just the overall good of God's people. And this tribal pride in Judges chapter 12 resulted in a bloody civil war that chapter 12 verse 6 tells us claimed the lives of 42,000 Ephraimites. Which you read those numbers in the Bible and they seem like just numbers, but if you think about them a little bit, that is a lot of people killed over ego, over misplaced identity. It just shows us the damage and pain and trauma that can result from misplaced identity, having our self-worth, our self rooted in the wrong things. So Jephthah is an interesting study. I think he placed his self-worth and his identity in his faith in God. He seems a complicated character, and I didn't spend a lot of time just studying his character and him as a person. He, in the setting, or the passage in chapter 11 where he is speaking with the Ammonites, trying to solve the issue peaceably, he recites a lot of the history of the children of Israel. And coming from someone who had been ostracized and had to live as an outcast, it made me think his identity was with the people of God. He is mentioned in Hebrews 11 in the Hall of Faith. I think this faith in God he had enabled him to overcome the upheaval of his early life and to forgive and to do the work that God had for him. There's an author named J. Warner Wallace. I'm not sure, some of you may have read some of his books. He is a Christian. I believe he's still a homicide detective, and he does some writing of apologetics nature, more or less. He wrote a book called The Truth and True Crime, and in that book he outlined 3 ways that we can form identity. The first way was from the outside in. This method, we look around us, take things from outside of us. These are things that pre-existed us, and we attach ourselves to them. This could be something like family or career. It could be hobbies, could even be brands. It could even be religion. And these are, again, not necessarily bad things, but they are things that can change. The second method he listed was from the inside out. We look at ourselves, at our own heart, and we use the things inside of us to get self-worth from. These could just be preferences. They could be innate skills or talents or abilities. Maybe we are naturally good at something, and we exercise that gift, and we kind of identify with that. Again, not necessarily bad things. And there's some crossover between these two, the outside to the in and the inside to the out. But these are all things that are subject to change. And the third thing he listed, the third method he listed for forming identity is from the top down. The only truly stable identity we can have. If we get our identity from God, from Jesus, God is unchanging. And when we place our identity in Jesus, that's something that never changes and can save us a lot of trauma. Wallace contrasted these 3 in his book as the first group, the outside in, being things that we perceive. We look out, we perceive them, we see them, and we attach ourselves to them. The second group are things we conceive. We come up with them in our own hearts. But the third is something we receive. Identity with Jesus is a gift. John chapter 1, verse 12, well-known verse, but as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe in his name. So how do we identify with Christ? How do we go about actively identifying with Christ? John 13, verse 34 and 35, I'm going to turn to that because I didn't type it out and don't trust myself to quote it. John 13, 34 and 35, Jesus' words. A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. Verse 35 says, by this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. So this is our ID as followers of Jesus. And the reason this love identifies us as Jesus' disciples, I think it's because it's a love that the world doesn't understand. It's a love that cannot be obtained anywhere else. This is a love that is long-suffering, forbearing. It's not just something we say, it's something we do. It's a love that I think even Jephthah in the Old Testament didn't know about. When the Ephraimites came picking a quarrel, he hadn't heard Christ's teaching about turning the other cheek, about exhibiting Christ's love. This word love here is an action word. When we love God, we don't just keep that to ourselves. We live that love. We live it out, and that identifies us as followers of Christ, disciples of Christ. Another good way to identify with Christ is to try to be like him. He left us a perfect example. And when you think about things that people try to identify with or want to identify with, they often look outside them. They maybe choose heroes that they look up to, and they try to be like them. They try to copy their appearance, their mannerisms, their habits. And that's something we need to do with Jesus. There may be a lack of good role models in the world today, but the best way to be a good role model is to have Jesus as our role model. Jesus spent a lot of time in prayer. When we read through the stories about his life, there's a lot of time that he spent in prayer, in fellowship and communion with his Father. And that's something we can do. We talked a little bit about prayer in our Sunday school discussion this morning, and I appreciated that discussion. Prayer needs to be something that is a real conversation between us and God, as if we were talking to another person. We need to pray. We need to read God's word. We are blessed today, unlike any of these stories we read in the Bible, in that we have the Bible in its entirety, printed up, readily available. It's there for us. All we need to do is read it, consume it. We often hear that you are what you consume. You become what you live every day, what you are using. And we have a very, almost too easy, I guess, way to hear what God wants us to do, to live. Jesus also served others. Jesus was compassionate. He spent his life in service to others. He gave his life for others. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole about self-sacrifice here and giving up things that we find hard to give up, which are most things. But Jesus left us a perfect example in that way. He spent his life going about doing good, healing sick. He called out sin and wrongdoing for what it was. When he was confronted with sinners, he pointed out the sin to them. And that is something that I think we don't often think of as a way of exhibiting love. Maybe we do. We certainly should. If we truly love people, and if we truly care for their souls and for their eternal life, we're going to be pretty quick to try to correct them in ways we see them erring. So, in closing here, I just want us to take the question with us and think about who we are. Who are you? Who really are you? We can all come up with a list of things that identify us, that make us who we are. Titles, descriptions. And I've heard this illustrated as a signpost. You can picture a signpost with a bunch of signs attached to it, arranged one above the other. One sign might have your occupation. So my signpost might say farrier. It might say husband. Might say son, brother. Might say minister. There might be a sign or two with my hobbies on them. Might be a sign that says Christ follower. And we often think about, when we think of this illustration, I think we tend to think about arranging these in order of priority. So in our minds, we want to put Christ follower at the top and arrange everything in order of priority, how we want to live our lives. But I want you to think, maybe, if we're really identified with Christ, this post itself is the Christ follower post. And the signs hung on it describe us, but they're attached to us as a Christ follower. And picture with me, when you take one of these signs off this post, you look on the back of it, you'll see an imprint on the back of the sign from where it was attached to the post. So when people look at any aspect of your life, your career, your relationships with your family, when they look at these aspects of your life, do they see Christ's mark on them? We all want to be successful in what we do, no matter what it is. We all want to be successful at our career. We want to enjoy our hobbies and have fulfilling pastimes. We want to be successful and have good relationships. But I think the best way to be successful at those is to make sure Christ's stamp is on all of those things. The other aspect of this illustration I just want to point out too is if you have a post with a bunch of signs on it, the bigger and stronger this post is, the less effect the signs hanging on it will have on the post itself. So, you want to work at having your Christ follower post deeply rooted, strong, in good condition, well maintained, so that all these other things that identify you, that you can't avoid and that you don't want to avoid, we all need these things to identify us, but we want all these things hanging on to the sign to not catch a strong wind and blow the post over, or be too heavy and bear the post down. One last verse I'd like to read on identity is in Revelation chapter 2, verse 17. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. To him that overcometh will I give to eat of the hidden manna, and will give him a white stone, and in the stone a new name written, which no man knoweth, saving he that receiveth it. The book of Revelations is sometimes hard to understand, but that is something we can take. And when you fail and you feel as though you've let yourself down, and you maybe don't really like who you are in that moment, you can take that with you and remember that Christ promised a new name. Christ makes us completely new. Thank you all for your attention. I will turn the time over to the song leader for a closing song.
Who are you? Let's sing number 708. (708).